Hi everyone, welcome back to Westward. Today I'm going to try and share some more optimistic vibes with you about the future of the United Kingdom. I think myself, like many of you and many people in Britain, have had a difficult time the last few years as we've come to realize just how difficult our situation is with the economy, with the state of our border control, with the demographic trajectory and cultural trajectory of the country. I'm not going to bang on about all the problems that we have, but I do want to just highlight, if you'll lend me some of your time, some reasons to be more optimistic than I see many centre right and right wing commentators often be when diagnosing the future of Britain. So let's just tackle them one by one. Perhaps the biggest one is demographics and cultural change. Now, as you all know, we have had mass immigration against the democratic will of the country, directly against what was voted for. Tens of millions of people have come in, and that has had a drastic impact on our cultural cohesion. It's very difficult to assimilate people from all over the world who move here basically just for economic reasons and have no real intention of becoming fully culturally British. And really, to assimilate that can take generations in many cases. That's why we have the whole concept when we're talking in about these things like first, second, third generation immigrants, because you don't just magically become one of the tribe instantly. Although that can happen much more quickly depending on the personality and your relationships and just how your life pans out. So tens of millions of people, really hard to digest. And then people will show you some quite scary statistics about how the percentage of so-called native British people, basically just white British people that we think of as typical British people, who maybe have many generations of ancestry in the country, is falling off a cliff in many of the cities in particular. So, over the last 50, 60 years, it's gone from basically 99% right down in many parts of London, Birmingham, Manchester to below 30%, in some cases heading towards 10 and single digit percentages. And I lived in one of those areas. I lived in Tower Hamlets for a couple of years, and it wasn't pleasant because British culture had been displaced. But that's the doomer side of it. That's the doomer side of it, focusing on, okay, places where mass immigration has been directed, demographics have been obliterated, and democracy has been subverted. But looking at the rest of the country, and really still the vast majority of the country, the native British people, people like me, are still the overwhelming majority, and as far as I can tell from the data, will remain so long into the future, pending some kind of catastrophe or war or something. Because in many cases, the actual local population of these more rural areas or just anything outside of the city has been bolstered because people have been moving out of the cities as they have found the conditions there to deteriorate and found that their culture is decaying. They want to seek out something more familiar, somewhere more peaceful, somewhere maybe safer. And so many former Londoners have moved out into the surrounding countryside areas. And I think that's something we should look upon positively. I mean, the cause of it is not positive, but the end result, where these areas which may have been struggling economically have had a lack of people living there and a lack of families choosing to settle there, that brain drain and that demographic collapse has reversed, at least in the short term, where the total population of British people in these areas is increasing, actually, not decreasing. So I think that's a real optimistic thing. I've moved to an area much like that, and it's nice to see. You see families out, children out playing. You've got all different ages and generations here, and they're participating in the economy and doing all the traditional things that you might expect to see happening in Britain. And I think it's been bolstered by people moving out of the cities. And that kind of de-urbanization of the majority of British people reconnecting with the country and with what makes Britain British is probably a positive, thing, a silver lining that people aren't thinking about. And basically, what it means, because the people coming over for benefits and a cheap job, are unlikely to be going into the countryside and trying to set up shop there, not in the same ways for the cities. And so there's a structural difference which probably safeguards a kind of total rewriting of British democracy, at least for the next couple of generations, and that gives us some time to work on things and reestablish the status quo. So that's a positive thing. Another thing that I see right wingers talk about in fairly apocalyptic terms is the fact that so many young people are leaving the country. They're going abroad. And the way in which I would counter this, I mean, it is an issue that so many young, talented people tend to go abroad and seek out better incentives and better rewards for their efforts. That is a problem for Britain, but it's that analysis is divorced, I would say, from the history of our country, because Britain has been a global enterprise for the last 250 years. We had the British Empire, the largest in history, where we ruled, and I would argue improved, large swathes of the earth, introducing democracy, common law, vast improvements in technology, and the way people treat each other. And we've created the Anglosphere. So some of the only countries not to have violent revolutions and takeovers by hostile actors against the will of the people, using guns at least, to say nothing of our own situation, have been the Anglosphere countries. So New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Britain, and the United States. And those countries are really much part of our story. They're part of us. So most English people, for example, ethnically English people, aren't in England. They're in the English diaspora. They're all over the world. If you add them up, it's a larger number of people than in England itself. And so, really, if you look at the numbers, whilst there is some increasing flight of people out of Britain into those countries, largely the ones that we created, the numbers aren't that drastically different. It's been fairly continuous for basically living memory. And that is part of what gives Britain and British culture such a global footprint. If we switch that off, if we stop sending people out into the countries that we created and to many of our former colonies, like Singapore, for example, Hong Kong, and many others, we will not have the same Anglospheric dominance that currently, I think, puts the world on a good trajectory, where even though there are many efforts to undermine our culture and deviate from that path, it's still holding sway, and is the majority around the world. It's the majority power broker, with America at the forefront of it. And so sending our young people abroad to make their fortunes and influence the world will ultimately help Britain in turn continue to have that global impact that has been so profound over the last 250 years or so. And the third, and maybe final for this video, we'll see, thing which I want to highlight is economically. Economically, we've been in the doldrums, no growth, all the regulations have been wrong, the approach to energy infrastructure has been wrong, taxes are wrong, everything's wrong. Okay, so the economy has been doing dire and has across all of Europe. However, AI. Now, and I know a lot of you will be very skeptical of AI as a thing, but it is happening everywhere, and you often cannot fight change. You just have to work with it and try and turn it into the best thing possible. And it is notable that Britain currently has the third largest AI economy in the world. So we have some really quite interesting tech startups which are world leading. We have Google DeepMind located in London because of Dennis Hassabis, who is British and basically has set that up, made huge impacts with AlphaFold, if you know the space. So the machine learning technology behind protein folding, which allows you to take a sequence of amino acids, predict the shape of the protein that will fold into, and then basically, without doing so many trial and error experiments, do drug discovery at a really advanced rate. And so that's obviously immensely valuable in medicine. And he's now got a new startup called Isomorphic Labs down near King's Cross, I believe, or certainly near London, which has the tagline "Cure all disease." That's what Dennis wants to do next, and he's a Nobel Prize winner with a lot of really actually impressive scientific achievements. So, cure all disease, I won't put it past them. That would be a pretty big impact on the world to add to Britain's long list of scientific achievements. And in general, we still have lots of talented people doing talented things or impressive things, and it's just translating that into economic benefits for the majority of people. I remain optimistic that AI will generate breakthroughs, at least, that massively impact people. And it's great to see Britain being in the top three, and hopefully we can continue to do so. And I think actually one positive thing I would really stress here is that it's changing the narrative around Brexit, because obviously in the intelligentsia world, Brexit is like this stupid thing which was just negative and daft, and obviously we should be friends with Europe and trade with them and be completely submissive to Brussels and all their daft regulations. But it's becoming clear to people in AI who are more center right often. Um, Certainly, they're more tech accelerationist, sort of low regulation people, if they're not always socially conservative, and that they basically can see that they're accelerating their work, they're having success over Europe because of the lack of Brussels regulation here. And I know Labour want to undo all that and ruin the good thing, to set the golden carrot on fire. But if we just remove the regulation, don't even have to lower the taxes, just remove the regulation and let people build great things and scale it up here, then we'll do very well. And we will become home to some of the most important companies in the world again, just like we used to be. So we have an opportunity to sort of hit the reset. And there's a whole bunch of problems layered on top of that, which will make it harder than it needs to be, from energy to immigration to culture to economic policy. But we do have the talent. We have the kernel of something really quite transformative. And so as long as we can just continue to leverage the relative economic freedom that we gain from Brexit and let these people do their thing, it will deliver some really remarkable results, which are positive for most British people. And so those are some three reasons for optimism for Britain. The demographic collapse is not unidirectional and will probably slow down, especially given that the numbers of people coming in are now slowing down. And there's even signs of life that net immigration from outside of, I would say, the first world may go negative soon, which would be a really positive thing for Britain to sort of stabilize the current situation. Um, People moving within Britain has stabilized sort of pro-British, traditionally British strongholds probably for the long time. We have the AI economy, third largest in the world. And yeah, there are some people leaving Britain still, but they are supercharging the Anglosphere once again. And it was people seeking a better life in the 1800s, which built America and Canada and New Zealand and Australia, which are all fantastic countries in their own right, which have added so much to the world. As a British Empire patriot to some degree, I'm just going to continue to claim all of those as basically part and parcel of what we have here in Britain. Yeah, they're their own countries, they're sovereign, but we share bonds of culture and blood and history, and hopefully that will continue to be the case going forward. So I think there is lots to be optimistic about. We just need to get stupid politicians out of the way and stop getting in our way. So good luck to everyone. Stay positive, and let's continue looking westward.